even get more official than that. Welcome everyone to week 6 BISBA. We're super excited to have you all. We're super excited for our guest, Stef Strack. And yeah, we made it through another week. I hope everyone is super safe and doing well. I know COVID cases are starting to increase as well. So hope you guys are staying extra safe in this time. So to kick it off, as you guys probably saw in our newsletter, we have special guest Stef Strack. We're going to I'm going to give a brief introduction of her. We're going to have her explain her story a little bit. Our executive board prepared a few questions that we'll give her as well. And then once again, anyone who's on this call, any members, whether you're new here, whether it's your first time, or whether you are a reoccurring member, you guys know, then you can feel free to ask any questions that come up as she speaks in the chat, any questions you may have for her. We really advocate for you guys to use this time really wisely because we know this space is very unique as well. And Stef's time is very valuable too. So feel free to ask any questions in the chat. We encourage you to do so, as well as you can unmute yourselves at the end. When we give some time, I'll open it up for questions at the end as well. Yeah, so thanks so much, Stef, for being here. I don't know, I know you know Jana, you know a few Bruins as well here. Super excited to bring you on. But just to give you a little background as well about the Bruin Sports Business Association. So everyone that's on this call mostly are hopefully, I guess, UCLA students right now in some capacity. We all kind of have some interest in the sports world and just kind of figuring out where our niche is within that sports world. Specific to UCLA, although we have an amazing institution, #1 public university in the world. It's interesting because we have a very broad liberal arts options for majors. And so that often it's great because it's general, but then oftentimes we don't have specific classes, like no majors, minors, or anything specifically catered to sports. So we have this club that basically forms that space, basically tags along also the importance of networking and building that repertoire as well, but then also learning from people who are already in that industry, because we know that's as valuable as the curriculum we can even learn in some of our classes. So broad breadth of students on this call, from athletes, from students here, and all have some sort of interest in the sports world. So we're really excited to learn from you as well.
Great.
So before I have you give your full introduction, we have a Who is Stef slide. So as some of you guys may have heard her speaking on in the beginning of this call, she's from Alaska, is in Alaska right now, which is pretty cool. I know you said it's super dark out there, and especially with daylight savings. And also she was a University of Montana women's soccer alum, which is pretty cool. And she has a degree in international business administration, minor in media arts. I'm sure some of you guys probably saw this in our newsletter as well. But she also holds business certificates from Harvard, MIT, Columbia, and Stanford. What a resume. And also, she was a former vice president and executive at Nike. Going on, she also was a former CEO of Rag & Bone, which is super cool. Also currently is the founder and CEO of Voice in Sport, aka This. And if you guys haven't heard of that, it's a trusted community that's building connections for female athletes and advocating for change, which is super awesome. I'm sure you guys know there is that gender gap within the sports world. So it's really a really cool platform that elevates the voices of not only girls, but women in sport. And it kind of is an empowerment brand on the lines of that. And we'll throw all of that, their platforms as well, or this in the chat too, so you guys can follow along and check out this. And so she's, like I said, she's the founder of Voice in Sport Foundation. That is also a nonprofit funding research on the female athletic body, and has micro grants to public schools. So that is a rough, I know I didn't even hit the surface truly of Stef's resume, but that's just to show you guys how awesome she is and how lucky we are to have someone like her speak today. So I'm super excited. Without further ado, welcome Stef. And we'd love to hear about a little bit more about who you are and how you got to this.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I always love talking to students who are interested in athletics and especially in sport. I think sport is a really powerful vehicle to drive change. And it's amazing that you guys are all interested in it. So yeah, I'm from Alaska. So I'm a big fan of my background and what Alaska did for me. I think growing up in an environment like this where you have an amazing community, tons of outdoors, you tend to take a lot of risk. And I personally had a family of ski racers growing up. So my dad was an Olympic skier. So was my aunt and my uncles. And I think what that sort of did for me was create this sort of like competitive drive that I've had in me since sort of day one. So that's been pretty amazing. And I have a daughter. And so since she's interrupting me right now, I thought I'll just, this is Sienna, my little mini me. I looked like her when I was really little. So just give me 2 seconds. Okay, so that's life of a mom. I also have 2 kids, Sienna, who is 7, and Parker, who is 5. But yeah, growing up in Alaska was pretty amazing. And I was a ski racer as well as a soccer player. Had to make a decision kind of around age 16 to go one sport or the other. Chose soccer because I like teams, and ended up going to University of Montana and studying international business. And I really love both art and like science. And so I couldn't give up the art piece and decided to get a minor in media arts. I thought maybe I'll go to LA where all you guys are and become a director from Montana, which is kind of crazy. But I did learn a lot of amazing storytelling skills and Adobe Premiere and Final Cut Pro and all those things that I think now as a CEO actually have been really useful because as an entrepreneur, you end up sort of doing a little bit of everything. So getting that experience was really great. So growing up in Alaska was pretty fun. Pretty intense family, and then on to Division I sports, where I really fell in love with business and the idea of like bringing sport and business together to drive some sort of change. So I was very inspired by the mission of Nike, which was to bring innovation and inspiration to every athlete. And that struck me pretty deep. I was asked to go to Nike Italy, so to Bologna, and that is where I started my career. It was a great job. I studied Italian, so I learned the language. I had my first job there. I literally started at the bottom of the bottom and then worked my way up to vice president of Nike Express Lane. And then really the 14 years in between that, we can certainly talk about today with whatever questions you guys have, but it was full of a path of learning. I'm so thankful for my time at Nike because it really built me and got me ready and prepared me to run my own company. So I'm thankful for that experience, but I definitely had sort of like a plan of attack when I was in there. I really made it a point to learn and to try new things. And so I went from merchandising to product creation, where I made some of the best products in the world, traveling all over the place to do it. Then I tried sales. And after sales, I went into general management. I was the general manager of Nike Skateboarding, which was a super fun job. After that, I was the general manager of training. And then my last role was to create a new initiative called Nike Express Lane. And that was all about how do you bring products to market at half the speed. So if it takes 18 months to make a shoe, how do you do it in 9? And so that role was like all encompassing on every single function. And it was like having a startup inside of a big company. And that's when I kind of caught the entrepreneurial bug. So I am super thankful for my time at Nike. I can talk about a lot of different areas because that if you guys have questions, I would love to answer them. that last role as the vice president of Express Lane was a pretty cool one, because we had to figure out, how do you shorten the time to market? And all of those components matter. Data and analytics matter. Your demand signal from your consumer matters. Where you make your product matters. How you connect with your consumer and all of your supply chain, everything that comes between when you have the idea to when you deliver the product. And so my job was to kind of basically re-engineer that. And I did it with building an amazing team and hiring a few outside startups, actually, because we didn't have all the tools we needed inside the company. So yeah, that was my journey. I mean, I can continue to go on, but I'm sure you have the questions, Christina, for me that you'd really like me to focus on.
Yeah, no, that was a perfect recap and kind of introduction to just part of your experience. One question that we kind of had, and it kind of actually relates, just going back to your first experience at Nike in Italy. And I think that's just so impressive because, you know, as a lot of like seniors on this call, we're like starting to look at different jobs. And last week, the Dodgers, he's senior director of financial planning. And one piece of advice, if anyone that wasn't on this or that call last week, he was kind of saying, start very open. Don't necessarily narrow yourself down to one team, one company necessarily, but look at like functionality, and that can open up a lot of opportunities. So it's interesting to me hearing you kind of say how you started out Nike, inspired by the mission. Totally agree with that point. But you thought even broader, like you went to Italy for that. What led you to that experience? Because I think that's something a lot of students don't even think about as an opportunity. It doesn't even have to start with just being in the US, you know, alone. So what brought you to that experience? What gave you the courage to even do something like that to start out?
Well, I think what gave me the courage was definitely sports, because sports, I think growing up as an athlete, and then, you know, just as specifically females, and how it empowers and drives confidence in us. I think that was a really big reason why I had the courage ultimately deep down. But the decision to go to Italy was interesting because I studied international business with a focus in marketing and finance, but I really, my thought process was like, I want to go and I want to study and go somewhere where I can work around the world. And Nike actually wasn't on my radar. I was looking at different jobs and different companies. And so when they approached me, I was like, I love the mission, but I really don't want to give up this dream of going to where I want to live, to try to get some additional experiences. Because going from Alaska to Montana is not that different. And I actually quit the soccer team because at that time, which I would not recommend girls doing, quitting, but I I quit and was dealing with some injuries and stuff, which led to that. But I went and did a study abroad at the University of Sydney in Australia. And I loved that experience. And I was like, kind of at that point, I realized how big the world was. I always knew it, but I finally got to experience it. So then when I got towards the end of my college, I really was set on trying to figure out what type of experience did I want to have. Not necessarily the job title, because quite honestly, the job title that I ended up taking at Nike, didn't even know it existed when I was in school. So I really focused on like the experience and what did I want to learn. I wanted to learn another language. I wanted to learn how business really worked across the world. And that's what drove my decision. And actually, that's what ended up driving most of my decisions at Nike for the next 14 years, which was a path of learning. Like, what do I want to learn next? Let's take that job. And so for quite a while at Nike, I took like 3 lateral moves. And I didn't worry about climbing this way. I was more like, okay, how can I build? And so that's when I went from product to merchandising to sales and even to strategy, all kind of on the same level. While a lot of my friends were like going right up in, or up faster, I felt like in one function. So that was sort of my process and my approach. And I think it will serve anyone well that is about to leave school and is thinking about where to go. Don't get caught up in the title. Instead, really think about the company, what it stands for, and do you see yourself passionate about that company? And what are you going to learn? What are you specifically going to learn? Because from there, you can go anywhere. You can always leave and you can always go another place. So that would be my advice.
No, that's really good. And another question specifically, as you were speaking at that about that experience, about you being a college athlete and dealing with some injuries too, that actually opened up a lot of experiences for you. I feel like that is actually a common trend. I think a lot of athletes that learn to transition outside of their identity earlier on, whether it's forced because of like foreseen circumstances like injury and different things like that. I even think that's why a decent amount like of athletes, even on this call, just being able to explore aspects of their identity. So I know you spoke about, and this relates to voice in sport as well, how right now only 6% of Fortune 500 companies are women, our CEOs are women, and of that though 90% of that 6% were former athletes to some capacity.
Yeah.
So for you, how do you think being an athlete, like what characteristics helped shape you to become, a CEO, an entrepreneur? And also what strategies would you give for athletes that are on this call too, and non-athletes and students, for that transition out of college as well?
Yeah. So I love that stat because I think that stat is that you talked about. It just shows the power that you can gain from sport. So never look at yourself as a student athlete as just like you're only an athlete, because the skills you're gaining from sport is going to be transferable to so many things. So I think that's number one. But I think that the stat to me always drove me. There were never, unfortunately, there's not a lot of role models in the space that are women in leadership roles, in executive, especially then you check back down to sport, and there's even fewer females in leadership roles. And the great thing is that like we are seeing progress, but it's like pretty slow. I think the 2020 numbers are like going up to like 7%. And so like it's kind of getting there, but it's still pretty slow. So I think that the traits, I think, for being a CEO is definitely you want to have the determination and the focus, and the ability to learn, because you can't just be one overnight. You got to build towards it. And so I think that is important to kind of to think about the long term. And athletes are really good at that, like setting a goal and then figuring out, okay, like where are my weaknesses? What do I need to work on to get there? And I took that same athlete mindset into like how I trained for soccer and ski racing into then like my career planning. So I was like really focused. I was like, okay, and I was really honest with myself. What am I not good at? And if I really want to be a CEO or own my own company, gosh, like what do I need to lean into that I'm not so great at? If I want to be able to lead a sales director, this is a real example. I was in merchandising at Nike, and I really thought, okay, I want to be a general manager at Nike, but how am I going to be a general manager if I've never been in sales and I've never led a sales team? And I think that's a pretty important skill set to have. So I decided to take a lateral move to get that sales job and that experience. And then I made it to the general manager role, and I could work really well with that team because I knew the questions to ask, and I could inspire the sales team because I'd been in their shoes a little bit, not as much as some of them, but like a little bit to know, okay, how do you motivate a sales team versus motivating a creative team, which is very different. So yeah, I think that path of understanding yourself, setting goals, and being honest with yourself and going for it. Johnny talked earlier about like what he's like pretty sure he knows what he wants to do. Like I wasn't that person. I sort of was like, I know I want to be a leader, but I just don't really know what that is. And I know I want to lead a team, but I don't really know what that is. And so my path was much more one of discovery. But through that discovery, I did set those like interim goals. First, it was like, a general manager goal. And it was probably like 2 years into Nike that I had gotten enough of a taste of like, oh, okay, like these are all the different roles now at a big company like Nike. This is what merchandising really means. Product creation really means. This is what data analytics teams really do. And that gave me enough like of a view to say, okay, I definitely want to be a general manager. I like a little bit of everything. I love the pressure, and I like leading and working with teams. And so it took a couple years of getting in a space like Nike that sort of gives you that view to see a lot of different things to then set my first interim goal, which was general manager. And then I just had an honest discussion with myself and other leaders at the company. I'm like, what did I need to work on? Now, I didn't always love what I heard back, but you know, it was great critical feedback along the way. And since I was an athlete, I was able to take that critical feedback and adjust. And so I think it's that mindset is going to get athletes really far and super important.
No, that's really good advice. And I'm seeing people throw like some of the quotes that you're saying even in the chat too. So I'm glad it's resonating. Another question based off of that, actually, that I was talking to Jada earlier today, because I think a big thing within the transition out of college, and finding a career, the transition out of athletics is recognizing that you're not always what you do. You're not a student. It's not that's not consuming of who you are. You're not just an athlete, but you're more like who you are is not just what you do. And me and Jada were talking about that and how that can somewhat change maybe if you're an entrepreneur, if you create your own company. Do you feel like at what point do you feel like there's a line of I chose to go this path because this is what I feel the most passionate about, but also not being so consumed with like this is who I am? Where do you think there is like the balance between that?
It's
kind of a tough question.
Hard. I mean, I feel very much like why I stayed at Nike for so long was that it was like a arena. It was like the ultimate arena for me to build so many skills towards what I was ultimately destined to create, which was something I was very passionate about, which was advocating for women and women in sport and underrepresented voices. I think if you go back and look at my life, starting in like 7th grade, I was advocating to keep sport in schools. And go into high school, I was advocating for underrepresented voices by creating this committee that would meet with my principal every month to talk about the issues of our school around race. And I think that I sort of always sort of knew in the back of my mind, I guess, like that I was destined to do something around that. But I also I was humble enough to know I'm not ready to do it yet. I don't have enough experience. So I think that, that those transitions are not easy. The transition from college to work life and then corporate to CEO to entrepreneurial, which is my path, isn't easy. None of them are really easy, but I always think that if you follow truly your values and you're aligned with your values, and you don't have 100% of everything you need, but you just have like a portion of it, then go for it. And that's always how, like looking back, I always coach people too and say, okay, you're thinking about your next job. List the 5 things that need to be done in that job for it to be successful. If you have all 5, maybe don't take that job. If you have 2, go for that job. And the other 3 scare you, then you should go for that job. Because that sort of helps with those transition things where you're constantly battling, well, can I do this or can I not? It's actually, and it's unfortunate, but women tend to try to get all 5 before they even apply for a job. Whereas men will be like, oh, I have 2, I'm going to apply for that job. And no offense, guys, I kudos you to doing that. But women need to do it too. So those transitions are hard, but I think the hardest transition for me was actually my earliest years, like from I don't know, maybe my like first or second year in the workforce to like when I wanted to be a leader, but I wasn't there yet. And I think that time in my life was really hard. So I must have been like 25 or 24. And it was because I was so determined to get to like what I wanted to get to, but I wasn't aware enough about how I affected people or how to effectively lead. And I think that was like a really hard time because I didn't really know myself very well as a leader. As I knew myself really well as an athlete, but didn't know myself very well as like somebody in the corporate world. So that transition was hard, but I think if you're not going through something that feels a little bit uncomfortable, then you're probably not learning. And since I'm a big believer in like learning, I always want to feel a little uncomfortable. And the minute that I feel like I'm comfortable, I get really bored. And everybody's wired differently, but for me, the moment I was bored, I was like, okay, what new project can I take on, or what new job can I take? And as I got older, I realized, no, I'm not taking more projects because that's just more busy work. And especially we don't, as women, we need to make sure we don't do that. Instead, go ask for that next job. Go get that job that you think you can't do. That would be my advice. Like if you're feeling too comfortable, then you're probably ready for something new.
Yeah, no, and I think right now everyone is definitely going through like weird transitions because of the pandemic in one way or another way. And so that aspect of like uncomfortability sometimes actually being a good thing or pushing you to like learn is definitely something I think a lot of people can resonate with. So then I have another question. Speaking on all these transitions that you faced in a bunch of different ways, from being an athlete and being a student to then going to the workforce, to then working for Nike, to then being CEO of Rag & Bone, all these different levels, and then being an entrepreneur, like such different spheres like you're talking about, which is so awesome. So I'm curious, at what point in your career did you start thinking about voice support? I know you said from a young age you were passionate about elevating voices. And I think there's a lot of things we can all look at and say like, oh, I was really passionate about this, or I've always been super passionate about this. But at what point did you realize, hey, I can actually turn this into something and like bring it into like the world? So was it when you were at Nike, or was it later on?
Yeah, I think when I started to get into management at Nike, so I must have been, I think, around 26. I was I really enjoyed running teams, leading teams, building teams, hiring people, like and I think at that moment I was kind of like, oh, like I really have a desire to be a leader at a pretty high level. And so that sort of started the first idea, I guess, in my head of like, so is that path at Nike, or is that path, building my own company? And I just think, taking a bit of my own advice, I wanted to learn more before leaving. And like I said, it was the ultimate arena to build the skills I needed. And the great thing about Nike is they allow you to move to different parts. If you can prove and yourself, you can do it. So I think that was really critical in my development. But so it started sort of around 26, and then I kind of kept it always there. And basically my husband will be like, every single trip we went on before we got married, and then all through when we had kids, every holiday, every time I wasn't at work, it was, okay, what about this idea? Okay, what about that idea? And so I was always like thinking about business ideas. And that was a bit about how I was wired. And a lot of it was thinking about business ideas for Nike, which resulted in a lot of really great things. But then I got to a point where I felt like I had gained enough skill. And I looked around and said, okay, like, when am I going to jump? When am I going to fly? Because it's never going to be perfect. I'm never going to be always all the way ready. And I felt like there was a bit of momentum happening in the world around change a couple years ago. And I didn't feel like I was making as big of an impact as I wanted to make. And so I took a jump. and I left to be a CEO. And at that time I was like, do I start my own business or do I become a CEO? And I was really had a hard time actually at that point in the road of what to do. But then there's other dynamics in your life, and I had family and I wanted to move to New York. And so we took the jump and took the CEO. I took the CEO job. I say we because my whole family was behind me. So we went to New York, and the second I got there and started working on fashion and, reimagining what the fashion world could be and the impact I could have there, I started to look at the other path that I was considering and saying, that's really where I'm going to make my impact. That's my dream. Like, my dream is to have an impact on girls and women, and I should do it through sport because that is the whole, and that's what I feel like is most needed right now in the world. And so then I sort of had like this crisis of like, well, I have already taken this path, but when you take a path, you make a change. If you feel like it's not the right fit and you have a vision and that vision comes and you don't know when it's going to come, you grab onto it and you run with it. And since I had been searching for years and years for the exact idea, I finally left when I finally had left Nike and went to Rag & Bone, and then sort of everything happened for me. I could see the world from a different perspective. The women had just won the World Cup in France. Megan Rapinoe was standing up and speaking out about issues that mattered. And then I was like, this is it. This is the moment. I have the idea. I'm going for it. So, I hope that helps all of you guys, because it was a seed that started, I guess, a really long time ago. But I didn't crystallize exactly what the company was going to be until I had left one place that sort of was like a comfort zone for me, which was Nike, into a totally different world that then sort of birthed the idea of what I wanted to create. So you never know how that path's going to happen. And don't let go, I guess, of those little whispers in your head. Like, I'm a big fan of voice because of voice in sport, but like, you have voices in your head talking to you about your ideas, and like, don't stress about them, but like, put them away and lock them up and be like, okay, like, keep coming back to them, because there's probably something really meaningful deep down in that for you. And by the way, I had a lot of people along the way telling me that in the stats that you couldn't get there. And you also have to block out some of that stuff, which is not easy, but it's important.
No, that's really good. Especially like speaking on the end of those, like the stats sometimes that go against like women in sport. But to your point, I think it was so critical for you to point out how not only do you pay attention to those voices in your head, and the things that you're passionate about, the things that kind of keep coming up in your life, but you were also aware to look at the landscape of the world and how things were changing and the momentum of things.
Yeah.
And then factoring all of that into like, now this is the right time to, start this. So I think that's really, really cool.
And, Christina, I know you're going to ask a question, but there's not a lot of women in sport. And so I do also feel a little bit like when I left sport, as a vice president in one of the biggest companies in sport, that I sort of like left something that I should be helping to drive in that area. Like, there needs to be more leaders. There needs to be way more female CEOs in sport. I mean, we needs to be way more companies that are birthed in sport from women. And so I felt like a little bit like, that's my job. Like, my job is to do that. I got to do that.
No, that's perfect. I'm just going to ask one more question before I open it up to everyone as well, but related to what you were just pinpointing, in that disparity of women in sport and women executives in sport as well. Yeah. A lot of women that are on this call right now are interested in working in sport. So for you, not only did you have a successful career at Nike and being able to climb and go into different roles, as well, leadership positions, what was that like for you being a woman? Because at the end of the day, no matter what career here function people want to work in, still there, no matter what path it is, there is a disparity in sport, whether you're an athlete or no matter what type of role you want to compete in. So what advice would you give, but also what were some of maybe the things you went through that was different just because you were a woman?
Yeah, I mean, it was not easy. But I like a challenge. So I was like, I'm up for this. Like, that's part of my competitive nature, I think, too. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the sports industry is not as diverse as we all want it to be. It's not just a gender thing, it's also race. And it is really important to bring more diversity across all those lenses. It's how you identify, it is females, and it is underrepresented races in those key positions. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's tough. I definitely don't want to sit here and say it was easy, but the advice I would say is definitely to surround yourself with a support system that is going to build you up. And that support system is super important. At Nike, towards the end, I wish it would have happened sooner, but towards the end, like I'd say the last 3 or 4 years, we had built sort of a group of women that really wanted to help each other succeed inside the company. And that was so important. I think for a lot of times you can see so few of yourselves up here that it becomes a competitive thing. And that needs to be like abolished, because you guys got to help each other. We all have to help each other raise up. So it's everybody's job. But I'd say it's super important to do that as if you're in one of those more of a minority position, then you need to have your support system. So that would be one. And I wish I wish I could say it was easy, but it wasn't. I think that I learned a lot about how to show up in a room and how to read the context of the room. And I didn't learn that at the beginning. And I think, unfortunately, we have to sometimes sort of shield sort of parts of who we are when we first show up. And that's not right. And that shouldn't be like, it shouldn't happen. But I think it's changing. And I think it's going to take all of us. So it's going to take everybody, including the guys, to make a difference here in this area. So what I would really like to see happen is more policies put in place that will help create the diversity and inclusion that we all want to see in the sports industry. And that means companies need to be intentional. And so when you guys are thinking about your next job or where you're going, I would highly recommend asking about, before you accept it, whatever company you're going to, ask them about what is their succession plan? How do they talent plan? What resources and services do they offer women? Because that is super important. What is are they transparent or not about the pay differences, right? Because the administration of Trump, unfortunately, just rolled back the rule where corporations have to show pay by race and gender. Now, companies can still decide to do that. Now there's just not government telling them they have to do it, which is unfortunate, because even that little ask drives some transparency, and transparency drives some change. So as you guys are thinking about where you're going to go and take your jobs, I would really just take a look at that, understand the policies they have in place, take a look if they are transparent about their pay gaps, and what are their goals to get there. So I think companies can be really intentional about turning things around. But while you're in it, and while we're all kind of going into the sports industry and trying to make it into those great positions, I think you got to keep in mind, don't ever lose yourself. Don't ever show up that's in a way that's not authentic to you. And that would be the biggest piece of advice I have to give you, because I can tell you, for me, it wasn't that easy. But once I started showing up as my authentic self, that's when I felt good about everything I was doing. And, I think we all have to go through learnings, but I would hate for you guys to have to go through too many years of that.
No, that was really good. I just threw that quote in the chat. Don't ever show up in a way that isn't authentic to you. I think that's so good. And something just like as a constant reminder for us. Okay, now I'm going to open it up to the group. I think Colin has one to start. But you guys can also unmute yourselves and ask any questions now.
I just want to say hi to Taylor because I saw that. Hi.
Yeah. So I just had I had two questions real quick, if that's all right. And Stephanie, thank you for all you've shared. This has been some very valuable information and I really appreciate it. So my question is, like, I was reading your Wall Street Journal article where you
Mhm.
mentioned like some mentors that you had, like AK Pradeep and
Yeah.
Genevieve Goff, and you refer to AK as like your Jedi master, which I thought was really cool. You
Yeah.
mentioned like how influential they were in some of the career moves you've made. And so I was just curious, like, what were some of the most important things they taught and shared with you?
Yeah, so let's start with AK Pradeep, Jedi Master. I think so. This one, Johnny, for you is like when I was vice president of Express Lane, we didn't have all the data and analytics that we needed to really innovate in the way that we were trying to. And so I went out with the CTO of Nike and we interviewed a bunch of startups to try to bring in some new thinking to what we were doing. And one of the people we interviewed was AK Pradeep and his company Machine Vantage, which is an AI machine learning company. And the exposure to him was just like, it was almost like he was from another universe. I had been inside one company and one company culture for 14 years. Actually, that time it was more like 13 or 12 when I met him. And I was kind of like, whoa, like, wait a minute, like this is, there's so many amazing people doing amazing things. And I had no idea that they were going on. So his influence on me was pretty big. I think he helped me think about the world in a completely different way. He's a computer science, like neuroscience guy from UC Berkeley, like very different than like a businesswoman who's like super into like, running a sports company. So I learned from him. I just looked at how to look at the world differently. And that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you guys is surround yourself by diverse thinkers, diverse backgrounds, because just the mere fact that they're going to look at things differently than you is how you're going to learn. And I wish I would have learned that earlier. I didn't seek out more people like that. I was very focused on my job at Nike. So from him, that's what I learned. And then from Genevieve, Genevieve's amazing. She worked for Hillary's campaign. She's amazing. She actually is from Alaska. So she and I come from similar backgrounds. And funny enough, both ended up in New York. And she was in, it's so funny how you grow up with somebody and then like 20 years later, here you are, and you guys both have sort of the same values about trying to make a difference in the world. And so from her, I learned a lot of philanthropic sort of thinking. And she helped me think about, just push me a little bit on like, I knew I wanted to make an impact with voice in sport, but she helped me really like think through how I was going to push and make a change on the policy side. And so she influenced how I set up the foundation and how I'm creating the advocacy team at Voice in Sport. So we have an advocacy team. We're building it right now. So any of you who know passionate female athletes that are in college that want to be part of driving change for women and women in sport, send them my way because we're building that team. But I learned a lot from her too. I think biggest piece of advice I'm glad you read that, Colin, but the biggest piece of advice is like finding different mentors in your life that come from different backgrounds than you. And can be so valuable. I wish I would have done that earlier. A lot of my mentors were inside the company at Nike. And I wish I would have earlier been like a little bit more diverse in how I was thinking about my mentors.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I really appreciate that. I like that idea of like diverse thinkers and stuff like that. I think if we all had some more of that, we'd all probably be smarter, brighter individuals. So
Yeah.
that's definitely something I'll take note of. And I guess my last question would just be like, how is a failure or maybe like an apparent failure set you up for later success? Like, do you have maybe a quote unquote favorite failure of yours?
Well, speaking of failure, yes, I have failures. Even using the word failure was a failure once that I did with a team. I had a lot of things that didn't go right during my career, and always learned from them. I think probably one of the hardest ones is when you don't get a job that you apply for, which happened to me earlier on in my career. And that was super tough. I think I was 25 or something like that, 24, 25. And I was at Nike and went for a job and didn't get it and just was like heartbroken. And was like, I think when you're a high achiever and you work really hard and then you don't get something you're going after, it's hard to swallow that. And so yeah, I think that's a big, I mean, I don't know if I'd call it a failure now, looking back on it. I think there's a reason why I didn't get that job, and I learned from it, and it helped me go a different path. And so that path ended up being fine, but in the moment felt pretty tough, you know? And so we're all going to have those moments, I think. And every successful person, if they tell you they haven't had that moment, it's probably not true.
Thank you.
Hi, I have another question actually.
Okay, yeah, Danielle, hey.
First of all, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. And earlier on, you mentioned that any job has like a certain set of criteria that you need to meet in order to be successful. And you mentioned how men are so quick to go at it when they only meet 2 of the criteria versus women who like feel the need to have all 5. Why do you think that is? And also like what advice you have for us who are very much like that, who like want to they meet all the requirements before they go for something?
Okay, well, first of all, my advice would be just start looking at jobs that you can confidently say, yeah, I don't have that exact experience, but go for it if you like the idea of that job, you know, and it's part of a company that you're passionate about and you're aligned with your values, then go for it. So I would just say, like, you have to break some rules. You have to break your own rules that you've created for yourself. And then kind of sit back and be like, wait, why did I create those rules? Like, what am I thinking? Why am I acting that way? You know, because you're a student and you are a good student. I bet you're like, so I think you have to think about, that's the world that I just came from. School and academics, very different than going into an industry and a world where you want to create change. The world isn't like that. The world isn't like tick tock, yes, 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 okay, therefore you're successful. No. And so just like applying to a job, you shouldn't be like tick, 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 yes, I should apply. You should be like tick, tick, oh, I really like this, I'm gonna go for it. You know, that's it's gonna take some practice though. So you gotta watch yourself, watch your inner voice, like what, you know, like even tonight, you should just go on and find a couple of jobs that you're like, oh, am I close to it? I mean, I wouldn't recommend going for a job that says like 20 years experience and you have like 1, but you know, I mean, you should definitely rewire a little bit your internal thinking, because it's going to be so important for you to do that, to climb, to move forward, and more women need to do that.
No, for sure, definitely. Thank you. I'm definitely one of those people who do that. Like I like have been looking at jobs recently because I'm a 4th year. I'm about to graduate soon, and I'm just like, wait, but I don't have that experience. But I'm also like super willing to learn it. So thank you.
Yeah, think about also like what else do you bring to that job that might not be on the job description. You know, like I just did a job. I just wrote a job description and I didn't put everything on there that I need for that job, you know? So you also have to remember, like from the other side, they might be looking for somebody also that of 4 or 5 qualities that you have, but they just didn't express it in the job description. So, but if you don't go and apply, they're never going to know who you are.
For sure. Thank you so
much. And I would say just on that front, since I've been doing a lot of interviews, you customize what you're doing to who you are applying to, and take an effort for the jobs you really want, because you can really tell somebody who's just going through this right now, the ones who took an extra 15-20 minutes to write a cover letter, even if it's a paragraph, and the ones who didn't, you know? So you want to stand out too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. Again, thank you so much for your time today. Jada has told me so much about the resources that VIS offers for female athletes, and I was a little bit curious to know, what do you hope to see in the future for VIS and VIS Foundation?
Yes. So first, we call it VIS. And it's only because there's multiple meanings of the word VIS. Viz is a Latin word that you would pronounce vis. That means power and force in Latin. It's also the abbreviation though for visibility, and the acronym for voice in sport. And so what we're really trying to do is bring more visibility to female athletes. I feel like in the sports industry, there is one voice, and it's primarily male. And I think that it's time that we have another voice in the sports industry. And so a big part of what I'm trying to do is inspire women and men to join in, to bring another voice to the table. And all those underrepresented voices, like, let's raise them up and drive some change with that. While I was creating the companies, I really wanted to create a sports brand, a sports company that was going to have impact, be cool, and do good. And that's Viz, voice in sport. But I didn't want to do footwear and apparel. I had done that for 15 years. I don't want to sell those things. I really wanted to create something meaningful that would have impact for years and generations to come. And so that was Viz and voice in sport. And on the foundation side, when I dug into the research, I just found so many holes. And we know that girls have challenges through their journey in sport, but there's not a lot of research happening around women's bodies. And most science is done on, without gender specification. And so there's just a lack of science on the female body, the female athletic body even more. So I felt like that's a really important area to tackle. And at the highest level, what we're trying to do with both organizations is advocate for change. And so that change means we're going to go in and we're going to help drive enforcement around Title IX, education around Title IX, enforcement. Those opportunities for girls in public schools, both at the middle, high school, and college, make up the bulk of like the area that we're going to focus on. And so we're putting together this advocacy team to help drive that change. And, it's a pretty important thing for us to do. So if you want to join us, Hillary, you can.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm not a college athlete, but I was an athlete in high school and growing up. So I definitely align with what you're saying a lot. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Cool.
I have one more question.
Okay.
I was trying to wait. I know. Because the things you're saying is just so interesting because it parallels a lot with some of my interests. And I'm really interested in marketing and brand marketing. And the reason why is actually because I'm just super passionate, similarly, I guess, about like elevating certain voices. And I remember being in a public policy class that I just happened to kind of take last year. And I realized after that is, media can go to one extent, but actually, a call to action to change policy makes things go full circle and actually creates tangible change. So I'm super inspired by you talking about not only Voice in Sport being a media platform or empowerment brand, but also going after real policy change and seeing that change. So I guess my question then for you would be, because I know you're saying change has to come from a lot of different avenues. I know Women in Sport is starting to get a little bit more respect, I would say. I know in COVID, the WNBA viewership went up a little bit. People started sporting the WNBA hoodies. I have one myself. But in what ways do you see like this working, not only for policy change, but what other ways would you see this working to help cultivate real change in the sports world?
So I think a lot of people do marketing and talk about the issues, but I don't see a lot of action and that's really what it's going to take. It's going to take some hard work and some action. And so that's what we plan on doing at Viz. And you're 100% right, Christina. The reason why I call it a sports advocacy platform is because we do have to drive change on the policy side, and we have to do also some grassroots, like, warming up. we have to fight for the change we want to see, and we have to change policy. You cannot expect it to come from all these big players that have been around forever, because their alignment is focused on different things, right? And so for Viz, we're super focused on driving change. Well, how do you drive change positively? You have to think about how you can do that in a large scale format. And that does start with some influence on policy. And so what is the biggest policy around women in sport? Title IX. And that affects the most girls. And when you like click down into it, it talks about the opportunities girls get, which they're getting way fewer. I think it's 1.3 million fewer opportunities girls are getting in just high school versus boys. And that's just high school. And then you go to college, and college, unfortunately, a lot of the social media efforts behind the sports teams go to support the men's team, and the women's team has to do it themselves. Okay, how's that equal opportunity? Well, that should be enforced by Title IX, but there's a lack of enforcement. There's a lack of education and literacy. And so that's how we're going to make a difference. So that's what I mean by doing something, advocating, taking charge, not just talking about how it's important. And so I think that there's a very big difference between those two things. And if you want to be part of change, you should go to an organization that's going to take action, not just talk about it. It's a big difference, and people like yourself recognize that. But it's going to take a lot of people to do it, which is why I think at Viz, we're trying to bring together powerful people, women, men, everybody, to try to drive the change. It's not going to be easy, but I think if we're not going to do it, who's going to do it?
Definitely. I think that's a great, I know we already hit 7 o'clock. I think we had so many good answers and questions. And I think this is a perfect place to end our meeting today. I have a last few slides for any of the newcomers as well on this call. So going back, and then I'll conclude us out. But for anyone that may be new, but also just for the members on the call today, next week at the same time, we'll have, instead of having a guest speaker, we're going to have a resume and cover letter workshop. So it's our first workshop for the quarter. Yeah, we try to spice it up a little bit. So we're going to try to get all of our resumes and cover letters together so that we can get internships and jobs.
Can I just say one thing on this? Because I'm not going to be at next week's meeting, and I think this one I have given so much mentorship on, and I just want to, very important, a first view of your resume. If it is crowded with words, nobody is going to read it, period. It needs to be simple, and because I know this sounds very superficial, but it needs to be simple and not too much stuff on it. The last point is if it is just bullet points with the title of your job and just bullet points, that is comes across as somebody who looks at hundreds of resumes a week as somebody who is not strategic and hasn't thoughtfully spent the time thinking about what they actually did in that job and what they're trying to communicate to the person that's reading it. So for however much that helps, you should always think about, whenever you're writing a sentence for a resume, I did this and it resulted in that. Because anybody can do this, but not everybody can get the result you did. So think about that every time you write a sentence. And if you can't think about that, maybe don't put the sentence on there.
That's really good advice. I need to look at my resume later today.
Yeah, you.
Hey, making me check mine right now too.
I just have to say I'm super passionate about this because I have helped so many people with this topic, and I want to look at better resumes. I want you all to have the best resumes.
No, that is super helpful.
We can have a competition. Whoever has the best resume will get a 15-minute call with me about how to make it even better.
There you go.
That sounds like a good plan. And we already got a little bit. So as I said, we have a resume and cover letter workshop next week, but we got a little taste just now. So hopefully you guys take that into account as well. Also, Colin just put in, if you guys are new, we have an attendance policy. We just want to give you guys points and credit for showing up today, whether you are officially a member or you're completely new. Please fill that out. We'd love to connect with you guys. So that's the end of our meeting today. Everyone just give Steph a round of applause. Thank you so much once again for giving up some of your time today to give back to the students, for all of us to be able to learn so much from you, even to the very end, talking about resumes and cover letters as well. But just from hearing all of your experience and all the things you've learned and all the things that helped you discover your passion is super, super helpful for all of us. So follow BISBA, follow Voice in Sport if you don't already on Instagram. As you guys can see on this slide, these are the Instagram channels as well and the @. But super grateful once again to have you, Steph. This was amazing. Amazing week 6 speaker. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.